المهدي المهدي خالق ناصر الثروات المهدي المهدي ثائر شارد سيف الثار المهدي المهدي فجر للأحرار المهدي المهدي أمل يطلق في الدنيا ريان المهدي المهدي
Assalamu alaikum and peace be upon you, dear viewers. Welcome to an episode of The Awaited One, a program dedicated to perfecting our relationship with a perfect man. My name is Sarah Bukhari and I'm your host today, and with me I have my very esteemed guest, Sayyid Ali Abbas Razawi. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
In the previous weeks, we've been discussing how to actually build a relationship with the Imam of our time through various means. In today's episode, we'd like to discuss the topic of knowledge and improving our knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge in relation to the Imam of our time. So Sayyid, just to begin, can we have a brief introduction to the topic of knowledge within the religion of Islam and the various categories that we have of knowledge?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think what differentiates human beings from the rest of creation is the fact that we are rational animals. So there's a quality that we have that none of the other animals have, or none of the other creations bar the angels have, is the idea that we have an intellect, which means that we are able to grasp things which are outside our experiences. So for example, an animal may feel or grasp things through experience, but that animal cannot rationalize things. So within the human being you have a number of processes. For example, in logic they say that when you look at something, that picture imprints on your mind and it goes to your khayal, so it goes into your imagination. And then from your imagination, it's in the treasure trove of your imagination. Then your intellect takes all of these pictures together and paints for you a sequence. So basically the way that we think, me and you, is in pictures. So for example, when I say dog, D-O-G doesn't go into your mind. What happens is a picture of a dog. Human beings think through pictures. This is the way that we experience things, and this is the way that we process things. Within an animal, you'll find that an animal may learn from certain experiences. For example, if it knows that somebody is going to be harsh to it, it may not go back again. But you find that the idea of thought and the idea of using the intellect is not there, because the animal doesn't contain an intellect. Human beings do. And the prime reason of the intellect, or the reason that we have it, is to achieve God and understand the realities of creation. So God, in that tradition that he says that I was a hidden treasure, kuntu kanzal makhfiya, he says I was a hidden treasure and I love to be found. So the idea is to find God, to understand God, to have a ma'arifah of God, requires for us to have a brain, requires for us to have an intellect. In the way that somebody comes to the sixth Imam alayhi salam and asks him, he says, what is the greatest of all knowledge? And the Imam replies, ma'arifatu jabbar, knowledge of Allah, jabbar. And he uses this ism, this name which is Jalali, Jabbar. So in this way, the greatest knowledge is to understand God. And to understand God requires us to understand all of the complexities of creation. As that tradition says, that Man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbahu, that person who understands themselves understands their Lord. And even though many people would say that this hadith may not be sahih completely, in the sense that the sanad may be dhaif or majhul, but the fact is that if you look into the Quran, it says that a person who doesn't understand themselves will not understand God. So to take that, within fiqh we say that when there's a usul that's being given, the opposite of it also applies. So if a person, for example, who doesn't understand himself or doesn't understand God will not understand himself, by default it means that if a person understands himself, they'll understand God. Or in this case, it says the Rabb, understand the Creator. So we have nothing that says that we'll understand God himself. But the fact is that we'll understand the Creator who creates them. So we'll understand a quality of God which is in relation to creation. So our understanding God is limited in a sense to his characteristics and to his actions. And that in itself is restricted to his rububiyyah, his lordship over creation. So when we talk about understanding God, we talk about a side of God. And again, God is infinite, so we'll never truly understand him. So human beings then are those creatures who understand God, who move towards a better form of understanding. The question which can be asked is, what's the difference then between an angel who is pure intellect and a human being? Because bearing in mind, human beings have two components. They have the intellect, the angelic form found, for example, in that alam which is known as alam al-jabarut, where the angels reside. And they also attach to this world as well. So they have this animalism within them, this the animal side of man. And that animal side of man is attached to the physical world. So the nafs of man, the human nafs, is attached to the physical world. And the intellect of man is that maqam al-Qudsi, and that alam al-Quds is attached to. Angels are different. Angels are pure intellect. Whereas therefore people would argue that we're slightly more deficient than if we have the world attached to us like this. But the fact is that we're not. We're more perfect than the angels. And the reason why we're more perfect than the angels, one of the reasons is the fact that by coming into the lowest level of existence, we are experiencing all of God's various manifestations. The angels reside on the third layer, third realm, and in this way they don't experience everything. For you to truly understand God in its absolute sense of the word is to then go through all of reality and all of creation, which requires us then to go to the lowest level so that we can transcend and we can go to the highest levels. So man has been created in such a way whereby we've been taken to the lowest point with the ability to be able to look at all of these and experience all of these and to climb all the way to the top. Angels cannot experience the lowest levels. So therefore man essentially potentially is more perfect than the angels, because man achieves a state which is more perfect. It's the first thing, intellectually. The second thing is, though, that man has something else with the intellect, and that's the capacity to love more than the angels. And I know that's not the question, but we have two things then, ability to love and the intellect of understanding. You see, to love something requires two things. To know what you're loving, which is just more than an animal instinct. To know what you're loving. And the second thing is the free will to be able to love. Human beings have that. Angels also have that, but angels lack in certain departments of love. Because it's not a discussion on love, we won't go into it. But the fact is that knowledge is very important. Ma'rif of Allah is very important. For example, in that verse of the Quran, somebody asked the sixth Imam alayhi salam, he says that what is the purpose of Allah creating us? And he says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. It's the verse of the Quran, that He did not create, basically Allah did not create the jinn and man, but to worship Him. The question was asked, what does worship Him mean? It says, يَعْرِفُونَ, the idea of having ma'rif of Allah, that greater knowledge of God, to become an arif in its true form. Arif, one who knows. What does he know? In this sense, ma'rif of Allah. So when we then go into our traditions, the first bab within our hadith corpus is, within usul kafi, is the intellect, the aql, and the use of the intellect. And the fact that the intellect itself works as a prophet, it's an internal prophet for us to guide us. So in this way, the intellect and knowledge is something which is important, it's profound. Because what it does is it gives us an insight into creation and it takes us towards God. So even that 2 units of prayer, as they say, of the alim is better than 1,000 of the jahil. In fact, to quote that tradition, that an alim's sleep is better than a jahil's ibadah. Reason being that he sleeps with certainty and he has knowledge of he will have knowledge of Allah. And the jahil could do as much prayer as he wants, but he doesn't understand the essence of what it is. And so in this way, we need to pray, we need to try and remove all of those veils, so that we can slowly go towards Allah, so that even our sleep and our breath becomes ibadah. When we talk about something like Laylatul Qadr, who utilizes Laylatul Qadr? Those people who have knowledge of Laylatul Qadr. And when you get to the highest level, then every single second is Laylatul Qadr for that person. Because Laylatul Qadr is not something that only happens once a year in the higher realms. It happens once a year in this realm. But Laylatul Qadr is something which is fixed. And that reality is in Alam al-Quds, and that continues to go 24 hours a day, 24 hours a day, every second of our existence. Laylatul Qadr is taking place in the higher realms, in a realm when there's no zaman or makan, there's no time and there's no place. In that realm is taking place. For that arif who achieves that, he is in touch with Laylatul Qadr every night. So the idea is that a person whose knowledge is increasing, a person who's able to connect true knowledge to the divine intellect, and you'll find that everything becomes open for him. And this is why it says the first thing that Allah created was the aql. In another tradition it says the first thing Allah created was the lawh. The first thing that Allah created was the qalam. The first thing that Allah created was the light of the Prophet. All of these things, whether it's the arsh of Allah, whether it's the qalam, whether it's the law, whether it's the aql, all of these things are one reality, and that reality is the reality of the Prophet, which we call the haqiqat Muhammadiyah, the Muhammadan reality. The first spark that created the universe was the reality of the final Prophet, and his reality was that which created everything. So all of the information of creation in its entirety is found within that reality, which is the first intellect. And the first intellect, or the universal intellect, is the essence of the Prophet of God. And in this way, in the same way, is the essence of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. That's why in Surah Yasin it says, وَكُلَّ شَيْءٍ أَحْصَيْنَاهُ فِي إِمَامٍ مُبِينٍ. This Imam Mubin is Amir al-Mu'mineen, is the perfect man, is the Prophet of God. So all of reality and all of its the knowledge of creation, all of its realities are found within one person. And more than that is found within one reality. And that reality is that spark, that nur, which Allah used, or the first tajalli, the first manifestation, the first tayyum, the first spark, and that spark was the light of the Prophet. So the Prophet and his essence are pure knowledge. And so it encompasses all of other parts of knowledge as well in its absoluteness. You see, there's a difference. You know, when we talk about an alim and a hakim, what is the difference between a wise man and a scholar? A hakim gives a statement. It could be of 3 lines. And the alim expands on that knowledge, and it could take 110 volumes. Prophet of God gave one statement, and to this day philosophers are still debating what it means. Alim takes an entire ocean and he puts it into a sentence. A hakim takes the entire, puts in it, and an alim expands that to try and rationalize it. Naturally, there's 2 types of knowledge which flows from there. That knowledge of an alim and that knowledge of a hakim, a person who's a wise man. So when Amir al-Mu'mineen says, he says, look, of all of knowledge is found in the Quran, right? Quran has layers, according to some traditions, 70,000 layers, infinite layers of knowledge. And all of that reality is found in the first chapter. And all of that reality is in the Bismillah. And all of that reality is in the Ba. And he says, I'm the dot under the Ba. Meaning all of knowledge was on one level. As one poet once said, he says that all of knowledge was found under the dot of the Ba. It was the ignorant who had to spread the knowledge, to understand. Why do we spread knowledge? Why do we research? For our own understanding. But a man who's truly vested in knowledge is that dot, where everything goes back to that microcosm. So Imam alayhi salam, or the reality of the Prophet and the essential reality, which is the reality of the final Prophet, is that which contains everything. So Allah's first manifestation is that kun fayakun. Everything, all of creation is found in there. It's like Ibn Sina when he says, there's a debate where he says that did Allah create in parts? Did he create an orange first, then he made it orange, then he gave it taste? No. He says all of this reality and all of its entirety, kun fayakun. And that's why Ibn Sina says, Ja'al Allahu mishmasha. Allah created his amr basit, simple form, bang, he created the apricot. Didn't create different parts to it, different taste to it. In one go Allah creates. So the question then comes in is that then why does he say that we created in 6 parts, for example? And the answer is very simple. We're going to give a conclusion of the answer, otherwise we could go into a couple of hours of this. But the fact is that as reality falls, so when Allah created everything, he created on that place which was the highest level of existence, which is the light of the Prophet. Everything created and contained there. So it was Amr Basit. It was a simple form, everything is created there. As we go lower down into reality, different laws come into place. And when by the time we come into the physical world, then because the physical world is restricted and in motion, then you find that creation here is also in motion and is restricted until you get to the higher levels. So essentially, all of reality, all of this world's reality is found in the higher world. And that reality is found in the higher world until it just happens. So in this way, when we talk about Allah created in 6 parts, firstly, there was no time there to say create. What is time? What are days? Night and day, what is it? Moon and the sun, right? The movement of the earth, there was no movement there. So 6 parts symbolize something other than day. And what does it mean? Essentially, when you look at what the philosophers say, it says that the lowest level of the existence, and because it's physical, is within time. is expansionist. Allah created everything in one go, but by the time it trickled down to this world, then He found that it became into parts. The reality was always there. But nevertheless, coming back, what is important therefore for us is to understand the various modes of existence in every level. And that's why you find that the prophets, and what is the perfect man essentially? What's the prophet? The prophet of God is that entity that takes the metaphysical world and the physical world. The perfect man is the combination of both. He travels in the metaphysical and he travels in the physical world. He is not found in one world, he is not found in the other world. He is found in all of the worlds simultaneously, and therefore he is a guide for all of the worlds and all of creation. He may take a different form in Alam al-Barzakh, he may take a different form in Alam al-Jabarut, he may take a different form in other realms in the Nasut, but the fact is that his essence is one, and he combines all of these worlds together. His aim therefore is guidance, and the biggest thing of guidance is the human intellect and knowledge. Biggest proof of the Prophet therefore, he taught people through knowledge and through the intellect. Miracles came right at the end. So it's the human intellect, and that I think is the importance why we need to learn knowledge, and that's the importance that Islam is given. What knowledge gives is power. Power gives you understanding. Understanding takes you to enlightenment. Enlightenment takes you away from suffering, takes you back to the point of origin, and the point of origin is the divine.
Thank you very much for that in-depth answer with such a philosophical input, and it's intriguing to hear that aspect of things. Often when we talk about knowledge, it's a very generic answer, but thank you very much for providing that. You mentioned about the levels of reality, and a theme throughout the answer that you just gave there was in regards to the different levels of reality and how the essence of existence is in knowledge. Can you provide us an answer as to what those levels of reality are, and how each reality, you said it starts at the lower level and the human being starts at the lower level, in relation to the pursuit of knowledge?
I think first let's break down what knowledge is, then we go into that. Let's say for example we come into the world. What types of knowledges are there that we're confronted with? We can break it down into two forms or three forms. Start off on the two forms. The first level of knowledge is known as ilm husuli. Is that knowledge whereby is knowledge via a medium. Essentially what knowledge by a medium means is that Allah's given you senses, and this is why within continental philosophy, within Europe, you have this empiricist movement that says everything that we are is because of our senses. So the first level essentially is a level of your senses. How do I recognize someone? My eyes see it. Tongue, taste, smell, hearing, touching. There's an entire school of philosophy in the West that says all it is your senses. There's nothing more than that. If human beings didn't have the senses, they wouldn't have any knowledge. So the idea is then a child comes into the world. It sees, for example, a nurse. The picture goes into its mind. It sees its mother. Another picture goes into its mind. And continuously there's a stream of information. Your senses, thousands of pieces of information which are going into your mind. And by this, what the mind does then, or firstly it doesn't go into the mind, it goes first into the imagination. And the imagination is a treasure trove, puts together all of these pieces of information, and then after that, the intellect abstracts all of that. And that's what we call quiddity. What is quiddity? It is the abstraction from all of these things. So I'll give you an example. How do we know that man is a rational animal? Because that is the most basic description of man. What is he? He's an animal that thinks. Go throughout the animal kingdom, you don't find anything like that. Our minds extract that. Had our minds not extracted that, and we only perceive men to be our brothers and our father, what would then happen is that when you see the fourth guy walking down the road, you wouldn't recognize him as a man. Or for example, a car. What is a car? Tin box with 4 wheels, for example, with an engine inside it. If you were to see something different, 3-wheeler, let's say, it wouldn't register that that's a car. What is a 2-wheeler? It's a motorcycle. You don't call it a car. So it's an abstraction. Your mind abstracts it. What is a dog? An animal that barks. If any other animal barked, you'd get confused. You abstract that. So the human mind abstracts. The first level of knowledge, therefore, that a human being gets is the level of knowledge which is via a medium. You're talking to someone, you process it. You're touching something, you think, okay, this is soft. Something is harsh. You smell something. European philosophers was an entire school that said that's all there is. Had there been no senses, there would be no knowledge. How do we otherwise differentiate? How do we know anything? If I'm talking to you and these words are going through and it's coming into my mind, how do you find out the meaning of what I'm saying? Is because of your experiences around you. Let's say, for example, I said to someone, let's say I was speaking to, let's say, one of our Sunni brothers. I said, look, Ayatollah Sistani is a marja. It doesn't mean anything to him. Why doesn't it mean anything to him? Because he hasn't experienced it. I'd have to then say, look, it's like an alim crossed with a peer or something, something along those lines to give him an understanding. He wouldn't understand it. Why wouldn't he understand it? Speak to a Catholic. I'd have to say it's like a pope figure. Wouldn't understand it. Why? It's not felt it, not experienced it. So the entire argument is that there's only knowledge which is empiricus, which is via your senses. First level. And that's open for everyone. That's the physical world. You can find God through your senses. But then there's a deeper knowledge. And that knowledge is known as ilm huduri, knowledge by presence. And essentially that's what Descartes was talking about. Because when he had a nervous breakdown and he realized that nothing is real, then he realized, look, how do I know that I'm real? He came to the conclusion, I think, therefore I am. So the idea that you think. What is thought then? The fact that you're doubting means that I exist, otherwise I wouldn't have been doubting. There's an I-ness in a person. Whatever you are, however you are, it's like what Ibn Sina says. He take a baby, suspend him in a vortex, take all of his senses away. Without any of his senses, he can't talk, he can't see, he doesn't know how a tree looks like. See, blind, if a person is blind, what happens? They can't see anything, which means that what? They don't know how things look like. They don't know what color is. And you take away their ears, they can't hear anything, so they lose that part of its senses. They don't have a tongue, they can't talk. Take a person, suspend all of his senses. Ibn Sina says that person will still notice him. Inside of you tells you that you're you. There is a knowledge inside of you by presence. In the same way as pain. You punch someone, you pinch someone, what happens? I don't need to tell you you're in pain, inside of you tells you. So there is a knowledge that comes from inside. That knowledge is huduri. Take it to the next level. In the same way that it says that there is a knowledge which is huduri within yourself, right? And the Urafas say, and this is where they differ from the philosophers. The Urafas say that all of knowledge is found within you. It's found within your fitrah. Because your fitrah is a manifestation of God's fitrah. All of the names and attributes of God in potentiality are found within you. Therefore, all knowledge is found within you. When you're told something, you're reminded of it. The fact is you know it already. And you can make it through inside of you what it is. All of knowledge is that. It needs to be rubbed, it needs to be scrubbed. So the third level of knowledge, the essential knowledge, is in one way ilm ladunni, the idea that is God bestowed knowledge which is manifested in the person. If you go back, if you remember, we talked about what wahi is. What is wahi essentially? When a philosopher describes wahi, says, can you see Jibreel physically? And does Jibreel physically come down? Is the debate. Does he actually come down and sits with the Prophet of God face to face? Angels are metaphysical. They're metaphysical. They're not restricted by time and space. If you look at some of the ahadith, it says the first level, the 4 levels of prophets. The lowest level is the one who feels it in their nafs. Essentially, what is wahi then? In the words of Ibn Sina, it's inspiration to that part of the intellect which is known as aql qudsi. And from that it has a ramification, knock-on effect to your imagination. Imagination produces it, has an effect on all of your body. So essentially, if you look at it on a philosophical term, is it just Jibreel coming? Yes, he can come down in the form of a man, in the same way that he did to Maryam. But that's not really Jibreel, though. That's a manifestation of him. True Jibreel, actual essence of Jibreel is metaphysical. It's not a reality which you can just sit down and chat to, because he's not physical. So inspiration, wahi, is essentially God's proof on that prophet that has an effect on all of the various layers of his body. What is that knowledge then? It's not knowledge from the outside, it's internal knowledge that God gives to a man that inside of you feels it. And this is where Mullah Sadruddin comes in. The idea that you get to a stage, all of knowledge is inside of you, and all of that knowledge, when it's extracted, you feel that knowledge. You feel it. You know what that knowledge is. You become one with that knowledge. And in fact, you become one. For example, the tree. all of the knowledge of the tree will be found in you. You become one with that. You feel the tree, like you feel a person. You feel yourself. So essentially, you get to a stage whereby all of knowledge becomes one with you. Why does a human being lie, even though they know it's wrong? Because they're not one with that. If, for example, you saw an apple in the toilet, however clean the toilet was, you'd never eat it. Why? Because you know the reality of the toilet. You won't eat it. When you talk about the ma'soom, why he doesn't sin? The very reason, he sees the reality of that. He's not going to pick it up and eat it. So you become one with that knowledge. So they're really a breakdown of the different types of knowledge that we have. The greatest of all knowledge is that knowledge that God inspires. How do you get to that? That requires you to purify your nafs. Because when you purify your nafs, when you remove your nafs from your intellect, it's like this, right? It's like the intellect and the nafs are like this. Therefore, for most human beings, the ego, the nafs, is shadowing the intellect. For as long as it shadows it, the intellect can't break free and think by itself. Tazkiyah nafs destroys the nafs, separates it, and the intellect becomes strong. When the intellect becomes pure intellect, then it sees everything purely with the pure lens. In fact, then it sees through the lens of God. And when it sees through the lens of God, it perceives everything in the way that it should be perceived. Why don't we achieve true knowledge? Why is it that we don't get these messages from the divine or from the other side of the curtain? Is because of the fact that our ego is overshadowing the human intellect, our intellect. And as long as it overshadows the intellect, it means that the intellect doesn't function properly. When you do tazkiyah nafs, when you purify your nafs, what happens? The intellect then sparks. And there's an ittisal, there's a connection that takes place with the higher, the universal intellect. Once the connection is there, it's like a joystick that you put in, or it's like those chips, UBS ports or whatever it is, you put it into the computer. Bang, the entire mainframe comes in. Then you have the entire knowledge of all of existence. That, essentially then, very quickly, and obviously we could go into great depth, but is a summary of what true knowledge is. That's knowledge and the different parts of knowledge. I've forgotten what your question was, so I need to be reminded that I can come back onto it.
The question was in relation to the reality that you kept mentioning, because you said that the essence of existence is within knowledge. So what are the different levels of reality that, and how is that in the relation to the pursuit of knowledge?
Again, the different levels of reality, the first level of reality is the physical world, which you call the nas. So in fact, the realities mimic the human body as well. Human has a physical body, human has an imagination, human has an intellect. In the same way, you find three types of worlds. The first type of world, philosophically speaking, the first type of world is the physical world, the lowest form of reality, which is mixed with non-existence. It's confined. It's not absolute. Hence you have suffering, you have pain, you have restriction in this world. Higher up, and there's two qualities of this world. It has form and it has matter. Form, you're in the shape of a person, right? And it has matter. If it was just matter, it would be just a blob. But as form, it gives an image. The next level of reality, and to use a very simple term, is alam barzakh. Otherwise, philosophers call it alam mithal. That has form, has no matter. It's like in a dream. You think it's real, but it's not. It's only form, does not matter. And sometimes that realm is more dangerous. Higher than that, the Jabarut, where the angels reside, has no form, has no matter. It's pure. So these are three levels that we've discussed, which are widely accepted. There are two more levels higher than that, which the Urafa believe in. The Lahut, which are the names and the attributes of God, and human beings journeying through that. And the Hahut, the essence of God, which is not open or accessible to us or anybody else. So in this way you have all of these different, and in fact we've broken it down into 4 or 5 different layers, but the fact is that there could be infinite layers within these layers as well of existence. Now man has the ability to go from the bottom all the way up to the top, so it's like an entire movement that we are, and the perfect man is the one who moves through all of these layers, goes up and down, up and down. He can go through all of these realities. All of these realities take place right now. Yawm al-Qiyamah is taking place right now. If only you understood it. Barzakh is right here, in the same way as we're sitting here. That's why in a tradition it says, Those people who are the urafa, the ones who have got that connection with God, on the Day of Judgment they have no hisab. They go like a light into heaven. And why do they go like a light? Because they've done everything. They've passed all of them. They know their maqam in heaven. They can see heaven. They see heaven as they sit here. It's like that story of Ayatollah Bahjat, where when the young man used to come every single morning from Tehran. He used to drive in, and it took him about an hour and a half just to pray Fajr behind him. And so, at the time he thought, well, why is it that he shrieks at the end? 6, 7 months when, and every morning is coming, but he says, why is it that he shrieks, he cries in his prayers, he shrieks at the end? And he said, maybe there's something wrong here. And that night he thought, oh, you know what, I'm not going to go tomorrow. And as it goes, he went to sleep that night, and he saw in his dream that he saw the heavens open up, and he saw that he was in heaven. And he saw the beauty, and he could feel the splendor of heaven. And at the time when he was praying in his sleep, when he finished his prayer, the doors of heaven closed, and when it closed, he shrieked. And that's when he woke up and he realized, no. When Ayatollah Bahjat starts praying, it's as if his soul is connected, and he sees heaven, and he sees the realities of heaven. And at the end, when it closes, the separation from true pleasure is such that a shriek comes out. At that moment he understood the reason why he shrieked. So there are certain people on this earth who are connected with the divine, who experience the divine, and for them these different levels are not there. See, it says in the Quran, that day when your vision is piercing. What is piercing vision? The ability that it pierces all of the veils. We can achieve that in this world. All of that reality can be achieved when our vision becomes piercing. And when that vision becomes piercing, we gain knowledge. Knowledge is not just linear knowledge, empirical knowledge that goes in our mind. And true knowledge is a light. And Allah puts that into the heart of whoever He wants. True knowledge doesn't come by reading books. Sixth Imam al-Islam is saying, لَيْسَ الْعِلْمُ بِكَثْرَةِ التَّعَلُّمِ. So Imam says, look, true knowledge is not that knowledge which is gained from reading books. True knowledge is the light. Light is knowledge. Light is existence. The more knowledgeable you are in true knowledge, the more dense you are in existence, and hence you can travel through all of these layers of existence. The more dense you are then in light, knowledge, existence. Three things are coupled. True knowledge. That's why the Prophet is the most dense in existence, because he has very little non-existence in him. The most dense therefore in knowledge, he doesn't make a mistake. And he's the most dense in light, and hence he's the perfect man.
Thank you very much for that answer. Is knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge and the perfection of the pursuit of knowledge interchangeable with existence in this case?
Let's break it down. What is existence? What is light? And what is knowledge? We have three different things here. We look at somebody like Mullah Sadr, he combines all of them together. See, the likes of Suhrawardi believe that everything illuminates from Nur al-Anwar, which is the light of lights, which is Allah. What is light? And we discussed this before, but might as well discuss it again, is that essentially what is light? Allah is Nur. What does it mean? What does light do? Light brings things into apparentness. If I was to close all of these lights, I wouldn't know that you're here. What does that mean? To me, you're non-existent. Light, therefore, when it shines, it makes apparent everything around us. Close the light, it's a non-existence. What is Allah, therefore? He's the source of light, which is the source of existence. The minute Allah's flash comes on, it says in the Quran, مِنَ الظُّلَمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ. He takes man from darkness into light. He takes existence from darkness into light. So Allah is that light that takes things from non-existence into existence. So essentially, what is light then? Light on one level is existence. What is light on another level? Light on another level is knowledge, understanding. When Allah manifests light onto your intellect, intellect opens. And when the intellect opens, you begin to understand. So second version, what is the Prophet therefore? The Prophet is a manifestation of the light of Allah, the greatest. That's why the Prophet says the first thing created was our light. It is through the light of the Prophet that everything else is guided. And it's through the light of the Prophet then that everything is created. Creation happened because of that light. What is the Prophet? Hadi. He's a guide. Comes from what? Allah being Hadi, guide. From that guidance, He guides creation. He takes them from non-existence into existence. What is non-existence? What is a lack of knowledge? What is ignorance, therefore? Ignorance is non-existence. Essentially, what is evil? You remember we were discussing evil. What is evil? Evil is a lack of existence. So therefore, goodness is pure existence. So therefore, existence and light equals goodness. That person who's the best person in goodness is the most in light and is the most in existence. I'm going to stop there and I'm going to ask you, are there any more questions that pan out? Because we can then go on to this, but it's important that we understand that concept.
So Sayyid, you've spoken about light, knowledge, existence as topics, and a lot of people would wonder, how is it that you allow that knowledge to penetrate your heart and not allow it to just remain surface so that you can achieve that ultimate state of existence and perfection?
So the intellect itself is light because the intellect contains the way to reach God. What needs to be done is that the nafs needs to be purified so that the knowledge from inside of the intellect flows, the knowledge of the heart. And here the heart can be interlinked with the intellect. You have something which is surface knowledge. That surface knowledge you were talking about, what is that knowledge? That surface knowledge is basically sensory knowledge, experience that you gain, but doesn't penetrate your heart. True knowledge, penetration of the heart, means that you become one with that knowledge. And by becoming one with that knowledge, you change as a person. So therefore the question is asked, what is true knowledge? True knowledge is bidat, is essence. You see, up to Mullah Sadra, all philosophers believed that knowledge is just add-ons. You're adding it onto your existence. Is what you call arad, is an accident. Accident basically means those things which are not essential in you. Let's quickly explain this. You have two things in philosophy. You have something which is known as essence, that, and you have something which is known as arad, accidents. That is something which is you. So for example, if you were to remove your hands and your feet, you'd still be you. So let's say you have a quality, let's say somebody, for example, I don't know, can make a glass. If you take away the skill of him making a glass, he's still him. If you take away your smile, you're still you, for example. If you take away the Prime Minister's ability to be a Prime Minister, it's still that person. So essentially, there are certain things in a human being which makes that human being. Haywan al-natiq. If you take away the animal of man, he stops being man. If you take away his intellect, he stops being man. If you take away his free will, he stops being man. His essence, therefore, is haywan al-natiq bil-irada, the ability for rational man to make his own decisions, free will. Knowledge, people believed essentially before, was the fact that it's just an add-on, you're adding it on. But if you didn't have that knowledge, you'd still be you. No, Mullah Sadr says no. He says knowledge is essential, it's part of your essence. And the more knowledge you gain, the more you are increasing in existence. So therefore it's becoming part of you, true knowledge. And you're never the same person again. So you are a person, but you're in movement. And so hence the entire argument of what is movement. Your soul is moving. Knowledge therefore makes you into a different person. Knowledge increases your existence. So therefore true knowledge is something which is found inside of you. That is the knowledge which we need to access. By accessing that knowledge, what you then find is that you can achieve, or you can go towards God. Each one of us has it. With the ma'rif of the Imam, right? I'm going to take it back to our topic. How is this related to the Imam alayhi salam? What is the Imam then? The Imam is the perfect manifestation of the names and the qualities and attributes of God in the physical world. The Imam is the container of all of the universe. Therefore, Imam is the wasila to God. We need to understand the Imam of the time to understand the Creator in that way. Because God isn't directly going to come down to us. So when we understand the Imam and that tradition that Sunnis and Shias both narrate, that Man mata walam ya'rif wa Imam zamanihi mata mitatun jahiliya, what does that mean? I've declared that I believe in God and the prophethood and the Day of Judgment and the angels. And here Bukhari is saying, a Muslim is saying, and Muhammad ibn Yaqub al-Kulayni is saying, that if I don't understand the Imam of my times, I'd die the death of a Jahil. Why? Why is there a connection with the Imam of the time? Or if I don't give bay'ah to the Imam of my time, for example, that Hakim Nishapuri says that that person who dies without giving the bay'ah remains on his neck, dies the death of a Jahil. What is it then about the Imam? That surely tells me that it's not an issue of furu. It's not like prayers. It's something based on aqidah. It's my belief. Why? Because the Imam is perfect man. Truly to understand God, one needs to understand the Imam of the time, who contains all of those names of God. That's why you have to declare the final prophet as the prophet. That's why you've been emphasized to take the wasila of that prophet when you sin. In the Quran it says that, go to the prophet of God and through him you'll gain repentance. So what is the Imam of the time? He is the perfect man. No, he's the hujjat of Allah on the earth, the proof of God. Understanding him means you understand wilaya. Understanding wilaya, the fortress of Allah. 8th Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal narrates this. So Ahmad bin Hanbal's pretty much the father of the Wahhabis, right? In that tradition, where he says that this is known as Silsila Dhahab. It's the golden chain of narrations, because the 8th Imam says that I, on the authority of my father, and he says on the authority of his father, and his father, and his father, claws it back to the Prophet. Prophet of God then says, he says that on the wings of Jibreel, in heaven it was written, or Mikael, the heavens it was written. What was it? La ilaha illallah hisni faman dakhala hisni amanat min adabi. He says in the same way, it says, Walayat Ali ibn Abi Talib hisni faman dakhala hisni amanat min adabi. The wilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the wilaya is linked to Tawheed. That person who embraces that is like a fortress, is safe from the wrath of Allah. And the 8th Imam says, and I am one of the sharait or the shurut of this. I am one of the conditions to reach that wilaya, to reach that Tawheed. So to understand the Imam of the time, therefore, means by default you are working your way to understanding God. That's the medium. Like your eyes, I'm seeing through my eyes and I'm seeing that. To go back to that tradition, when Salman, or Amir al-Mu'mineen in fact, comes to the Prophet of God, and he says, who is more afdal, us or the angels? And the Prophet of God replies, says, Allah Majlis, he said, it was the light of the Prophet that created the angels. He says, Ali, do you remember that when the angels were created and they saw our manifestation, our light, they came towards us, and as they came towards us, we recited La ilaha illallah, and the angels recited La ilaha illallah. Meaning what? In the same way they came again, and we recited Allahu Akbar, and the angels recited Allahu Akbar. Meaning what? Meaning we taught them Tawheed. They didn't understand. How do you understand something? Through something which you already know. If I said to you, for example, sheep, you didn't know what a sheep was. I'd say an animal. You know the animal. Wool. You know wool, and I could describe to you a sheep. People understand things via something. In mantiq they say, from ma'alum to majhul. From that which you know to that which you don't know. If I want to explain to you, let's say the Kaaba, how do I explain it? Box, black cloth. You know that, you can perceive it. Same with the angels. They didn't know God, Kanz al-Makhfiya. He was a hidden treasure. How did they understand him? What was the wasila? The nur of the Prophet and his family. That is then the status of the Ahlul Bayt. If the angels need to understand that to be able to reach Tawheed, then what does man think that he can reach God without the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam?
That was a beautiful conclusion, and I absolutely love how you brought in the topic of the 12th Imam alayhi salam as the perfect man in relation to this pursuit of knowledge and the topic of knowledge within the religion. And just to repeat that hadith for the viewers, the one who dies without knowing the Imam of his time dies the death of one who is ignorant. And the way that relates back to the topic of knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge is a beautiful conclusion. Thank you very much. In this show, we've discussed the introduction to the topic of knowledge, which was actually inspired from a hadith in regards to Anwan al-Basri, a companion of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. Inshallah, join us next week where we'll be discussing a hadith in regards to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam and his companion Anwan al-Basri. Thank you very much for joining us. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
المهدي خالق ناصر الثروات المهدي ثائر شارق سيف الثار المهدي فجر للأحرار المهدي أمل يطلق في الدنيا ريان المهدي